Now, important is this. FFT did not come from science. FFT came from clinical practice. I'm a clinician. Mostly, I'm a clinician. I'm a clinician that ended up as a professor, not a professor that became a clinician. So I started my career, as I told you this morning, working with juvenile delinquents. I started my career where many of you work in mental health centers, in community centers. I started my career with sitting in the room with families, sitting in the room with youth, sitting in the room with difficult clients, and asking myself, what should I do? So the origins of the FFT story are, it is a clinical model that came from a clinical need. And the need has to do with what we discussed this morning. The need has to do with the fact that in many countries and in many places, youth, children, and families are faced with some very difficult problems. Whether they be just drug abuse, whether they be behavior problems, whether they be mental health problems. This is the clinical need. This is what we have to help fix. This is why you're professionals. You are in this business to help with this clinical need. So FFT's story begins with a clinical need, and the clinical need was to take the most very difficult of the children or the kids or the families and to find a way to help them. And as I said, that's our largest referral source. Now, to think a little bit about families, the question is, when you have very difficult families, what is the thing that they need? And the question is, when you go to deal with that very difficult clinical situation, what is the basis of what you do? And I want to start by suggesting to you that really, really important is to take what we call an is to move away from the outside-in approach and take an inside-out approach. Now let me really briefly explain what I mean. When a family comes to see us, it is very easy to look at them and say, here is a problem, there is a problem, and there is a problem. It is very easy to bring culture, society, or our own values to bear, to look at the family and make judgments. For example, my students say that I am a no-drama person. Now what that basically means is I don't like a lot of the politics and the drama of things. So you know what, quite honestly, I would rather live in a family where we just it was easy going and we sort of work stuff out, etc. So for me, if I were to take my value to a family, I would try to make every family quiet, calm, logical, and reasonable. Many people don't want to live that way. Many people have much more of a drama life where high emotion, high expression, loud expression is more of how they work. If you take an outside-in approach, you begin by looking from the outside and making judgments of the behaviors that you see. That's one way to do it. However, from our suggestion, that's making every treatment fit the families as if they're all the same. If you, however, take what we call an inside-out approach, the question then becomes, what does the behavior mean in this family? And that's different than what the behavior means in that family. And each of you see certain behaviors. For example, maybe it is that the youth is disruptive or disrespectful. Maybe it's that the youth is over-compliant. It's very different behaviors. You know that those behaviors in some families, it means a lot. But haven't you had the experience where in other families, the very same behavior, they don't even notice as a problem? Behaviors differ in their meaning from family to family. And as a result, as practitioners, it's impinged and it's important for us to make sure that we don't take an outside-in look. It's important for us that we don't begin by making judgments, but instead by standing back and asking the question, what does this behavior mean, and is it a problem, or how is it a problem for this family? This seems simple. It's very difficult to do. Very difficult to do. When I lived in Las Vegas, my next door neighbor was Italian. And his son and my son were the same age by 1 month. And my next door neighbor was Italian, and he was a soccer player. He had played on the Italian World Cup team until his knee was bad. And when our sons were 3 years old, he had them sitting on the front lawn with the other neighbor boys telling them about soccer. And he would explain the spacing on the field and proportions of players and movement of the ball, and all the boys sat and shook their head. And when his son didn't pay enough attention, or when they didn't pay enough attention, he got very animated. He would yell and he would scream and things like that. And when I first met him, I thought, this is terrible parenting. Don't yell at 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds because they don't understand space. I mean, they can't even understand their name. How are they going to understand spacing on a soccer field? But then I learned something very important that was a real lesson for me. His yelling came from concern and care. And his yelling didn't have any impact on the boys. His family was built around expression of passion, expression of emotion, outwardly getting everything out. And his boys, it did not bother them at all. It was normal. In my family, with my son, if I ever acted that way, he knew there was a problem because I never acted like that. And he knew that something was the matter, and he also knew that I was a little over the top at that point. So even though it didn't fit me, I learned an important lesson. The lesson I learned is behaviors mean things only in their context. And the only way to get there is to be able to see the context, understand the context, and work from the inside out rather than the outside in. So we have come a long way in FFT. Our theory, or our principles, started in a very simple way in 1969. Our theory and our principles have grown and they've changed over time. We've also evolved through practice. One of the ways that I learn how to think about and do FFT is by seeing it work in different settings with different families. Watching it work with Dutch families has taught me things. Watching FFT work with Moroccan families has changed things. Watching how to do FFT with inner city African American families has helped me learn to think differently. So from our perspective, we've learned because we work in so many different contexts. Our science has also changed. So the FFT story is a story of change over time rather than being static and never changing. We think that that's a good thing. We think that that's an important thing. And in fact, we think that ideas are very much like people. They should grow, they should develop, and they should flourish, and they should not stay the same. And that's people as well. We grow through our experience and our time. FFT, as I said earlier today, is also unique. It's unique in the ways in which we combine structure and flexibility, seemingly different things going together. It is a funny model in that it is the creativity and the structure of FFT. Number one, look at the top picture. What a great picture. Wouldn't it be nice to look at the world through dandelions every day? It would probably be a kinder and gentler and more wonderful world if we could do that. And kids have a way of looking at the world through a lens that's very unique and very special. A lens, as I said earlier, is central to every intervention, and it's critical to FFT. However, you can have a lens, but you still have to go somewhere. You've got to get from the beginning day of therapy to the end day of therapy. And I must tell you that for an FFT therapist, on the first session, you're already planning for the last one. You should be planning the end at the beginning, because otherwise you'll never get to the end. And you should follow a map so that you have markers along the way so that you know that your journey is passing through the correct places. Now, the wonderful thing about a map is it helps you go in a direction, but a map never tells you everything you're going to find along the way. All of you have taken car journeys, and you've driven off. By the way, many of you have taken journeys with your families on vacation, and you load everyone up in the car, and you get ready, and there's great anticipation for the journey. If you go and load up the car, back out of the driveway and head out, and then say, gee, I wonder which way to go, that's not going to get you anywhere very effectively. And if your car's full of your kids, it'll be just a disaster. You need to have an idea about where. And along the way, while the map helps you know different points, it does not tell you what to do when there's road construction. It does not tell you what to do when suddenly the map changed and you didn't know it. You still have to bring the third component in, which is you have to be creative even within following a map to get around. So FFT really is a story of three things. It is a story of lenses, it is a story of maps, and it is a story of the last thing, which is art. And that's the story.